All right. So welcome. So I see some old faces and some new faces. So I'll ask you for one sentence about you, maybe in a minute, but um, and also online. Um, okay. So one thing I should warn you is that the reason I have this computer is because our sound is having a little bit of trouble. So for the Zoom people, this is how they get to hear me. And but I think I'm loud enough. I don't need to use a mic, right? Okay, good. So this is Buddhism in a nutshell. Um, so basically, it's for everyone. It's not really just for beginners, to be honest with you. I mean, I've been practicing for a long time, and um, there are many, many places where I feel that, what I introductory courses, you learn, you see it or hear it in a deeper level, right? So it's not just because it says it's a nutshell, doesn't mean that well, it is in a nutshell, but it doesn't mean that it's just for beginners, because it's for everyone, to be honest with you. So my name is, well, depending on whether you want to use my real name or ordination name, but my real name is Shanka Mitra, as it says on the thing, I think. And my ordination name is Lobsang Punsog, so some people call me Venerable Punsog, but you can call me Shanka, and that's fine, whatever you want to use. Bit about me before we get started, so you have some idea. I've been practicing and studying for, I don't know, 35 years. Yeah, I met the Dharma in the early 90s, I guess. And I've been in this tradition for about, yeah, 30 years, maybe, you know. So, and I used to be I was a computer scientist in Silicon Valley. I was fortunate enough to retire early, and I became a monastic, right? So, and I have a couple of children. So I actually, like sometimes people think, oh, those monks, they don't know anything about real life, you know. So I have had the experience of real life, So, hello, Jane. Wonderful to have you join. Okay, so let's just, before we start, maybe we can just take 10 seconds and just reflect on what our motive, like why did we come here today? Like, what is our motivation um, to spend an entire day, right? That's a long time. And keep that motivation in mind during the sessions so that you can always keep a bigger picture and put everything that you hear or think in that context, right? Okay. So this is Buddhism in a nutshell. By the way, I apologize if I don't remember all your names, So Ken, Chloe, David, Anthony, David, right? Dave. Okay. All right. Okay. And Jane, of course. Okay. So so yeah. Um so what is I just want to I like to ask people like this question, and at least you think about it, like what do you think Buddhism is, right? I mean, like, what do you think? What's your impression of what it means to be a Buddhist practitioner, right? Or what is Buddhism trying to achieve, right? The instructions and the path that's given. And at the end of the day, if you distill everything down, right, it's about mental transformation, right? That's all it is. everything else that is in the vast tomes that you see behind me, all the, anyway, I won't go into all the details of all the tomes there. Um, and the 50 odd years that the Buddha's taught, which is a long time, right? Excuse me, all comes down to that one thing, right? It's mental transformation. Um, and so, but, and okay, so that, and you'll hear me say things today that, that may resonate with you or may not resonate with you, right? Which is either way is fine, okay? Um, there are two things to try to remember as we're reading, listening, any Buddhist text or going to any teachings or whatever. One is that you have to, and the Buddha himself said this, is because the person in front of you saying something, you don't have to accept it, right? So use your discerning mind and you question it, right? Even though, in my retreats, for example, when I contemplate on things that my teachers have said, or I read in the text, like the lamrim text, or even maybe in some sutra, I try to disprove it first. I ask whether or not it really is true, you know? And that's the approach that actually makes change, right? So you ask yourself, does it really make sense, right? And and maybe it doesn't. So that's the other thing to remember is maybe it doesn't. But you don't have to say, well, it doesn't, so I'm just going to leave. Or, well, you can. I mean, that's perfectly okay. I mean, Buddhism is not for, Buddhism is not for everyone, right? Because, it's just like clothes come in different sizes. Why? Different people are, have different, body shapes and sizes and so on, right? So same with religion, right? So Buddhism may appeal to just, some people, but not to others, which is okay. But you don't just, if something doesn't make sense to you, you can just say, okay, I'll just set it aside. It's like the baby and the bathwater thing, right? You just say, I'll just set it aside. I won't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I'll just set the baby aside and then I'll come back to it later. Maybe one day it'll make sense because I'll have a deeper understanding of the context and in which it's, presented. Or maybe it won't, in which case I'll find hopefully something else that makes more sense, right? So that's one thing. And the second thing is, if you're reading or listening, especially listening, to listen with an open mind, which means not to bring your preconceptions, right? We're very prone to I like things like I'm saying this because I've done this, right? Like oh, I know that already, right? I don't need to hear this again. Or uh that's just BS and blah blah blah, right? Again, just be open, and if it makes sense, great. If not, it's okay too, right? Okay. So in this, however many, we have what, 2 sessions today. The structure will be kind of, it's 10:15 now, Mountain. So yeah, so we'll talk for maybe 45 minutes, take a break. So each session is 2 hours long, right? So we'll talk for 45 minutes, take a maybe 10-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute break, then talk another 45 minutes, and however much is left, we talk for that much more, and then we have lunch and then we come back and do the same thing again, right? Yeah. And so basically just an overview of what we'll talk about is the first session, I'll just talk about the background of, I mean, you may know this already, but maybe not, but the life of the Buddha and how it's still relevant, right, to us in the modern time, right? And a little bit of, the history of our lineage, right? So you have some understanding of where it comes from and the authenticity. Um, and then, some things about, and we'll start a short meditation. Also, we'll learn how to sit and what the instructions are and what the right way is. But you don't have to, well, we'll get into that. And so that'll be hopefully the first session. Second session, we'll talk a little bit more about the Buddhist path, right? The Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, and so on. And let's see, what else will we do? We'll do a little bit more meditation about the mind and understand what the mind is like, and learn how to meditate, kind of see where thoughts come from and so on, right? And if we have more time, then I'll go into something, the next topic, which will be an overview of the lamrim, which Jane already knows a lot about, I'm sure. So there you go. Yeah, okay. Again, interrupt me anytime if you have questions, etc., right? Okay. Yes.
This is scheduled for today, and there's another.
Yes.
Is it
The next Saturday?
Or
No. So next week we'll talk about, more about the Buddhist path, right? So the lamrim, which is the graduated stages, so it's basically goes from easier to, it's kind of like a ladder, stepping stone to enlightenment. So it was synthesized in that way to make it easy for people. And we'll talk, hopefully, maybe I'll make sure to talk about that towards the end to kind of give you a teaser, if you will. So you'll come back next time, right? So more about that. And then next time we will talk about more about how to practice, right? At least in our tradition, there are different traditions have different ways of practicing. And in our tradition, how to practice and how to start a daily practice, how to have a daily practice, how to not get discouraged and, and be able to continue with, as they say, joyous perseverance. So, like that. Huh? Okay. But at the end of the day, hopefully you see that it's about the mind. Everything is about the mind. It's not, I mean, things are definitely out there, but our perception is just not, it's rarely is it correct or accurate, So if we can remember that, things get a lot easier to handle. So, okay. Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. He was asking David. Dave was asking, about the next Saturday, what's going to happen next Saturday. So I was just mentioning that. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, so let's just think about the Buddha, right? So the Buddha is, there must be, there's a statue of the Buddha right behind me. Jane can't see, but there is a statue. And so the Buddha lived 2,500 years ago, right? And it was a time of, there were three major religions in India that started at the same time. Well, there was one already, the Vedic Hinduism. Then there's two major religions that started at the same time in India, right? And it was basically a time of great change. This was kind of like Italy in the Middle Ages, where the cities were becoming bigger, banking and commerce and trade was because of people were getting richer, and the old ways no longer, people were starting to question things, right? So the Buddha arose in that time. And he was, so he was born kind of like where the border of Nepal and India, right? So North India. And he was a prince, had all the luxuries of life, luxuries of, of his status, right? Aristocracy. and they said his father was a king. But at the time, to be honest with you, king, it was, the principality. It was really the king of a principality, right? It's not really like an emperor or something, uh, but still, he had the, all the luxuries of his status. And and one of the interesting things was that there was a prophecy that was made, when he was born. And I'm not going to the details of, there were many indications, kind of like you have in the Bible about, when Jesus was born, there were, the stars and, there were, like I can't remember all the details now, but then the three wise men who knew, all that stuff, right? So you have a similar tale about the Buddha, rainbows appeared, flowers fell from the skies, and so on. And so there were many indications that there was a really special person arising, right? Um, and a wise man came to the king and he prophesied that he's either going to be a great king or a great sage, right? And the king was very afraid because I think the Buddha was his only child. Maybe I think Buddha had a stepsister, I think. Anyway, or half sister rather. Anyway, so the king was afraid because that's his only son who's supposed to be the heir, and he doesn't want him to go become an itinerant, because that's what they did back then, right? They were itinerant sages, traveling from village to village. So the king basically gave him all the luxuries of life, surrounded him with beautiful gardens and he had a summer palace and he had a winter palace and all that stuff, right? And basically to shield him from anything that would, to spoil him essentially, so that he would continue to be a prince and want to live in the worldly life of luxury, right? And to keep his attachment to the world. And that worked for the most part, you know. There was I'm trying to think, where should I go from here? So it worked for the most part. He had, as he grew older, um, there were signs that he was very compassionate. That was clear, right? There's stories about, and we can go into that if we have time. So there were definitely signs already that there was something special about this kid, right? And he became in his late teens, of course, as was the tradition. He got married. He was, got married to a princess from another principality. Had a, and I'm getting a little ahead. He had a child and so on. He had a son. Um, but even when he was in his walled palaces and gardens, right, he was kind of reflective about what's going on, right? How does things work? Like, for example, there's a story of him in this beautiful he's watching over, there's farms down below and he's under a tree and he's just looking at everything that's happening, and the farmers are tilling the soil, the cows, buffaloes, I guess, are pulling the, the whatever, tilling thing, whatever you call it, right? And so on. And he was thinking, so he, in this bucolic, beautiful place, he was still thinking, about the insects that were being trampled over as the buffaloes went over the prop land, right? Or the what do you call the tilling thing? The plow. Thank you. And the plow that was, turning over the ground and was destroying their homes. And so he was, and he was thinking about the birds. And so there was this kind of aspect to his consciousness, his mind, that he was still questioning, even in his in the lap of luxury. So then he got married, and then he got married and so on, and continued to stay, live in luxury. And there was lots of, as they say, wine, women, and song. He was, there were beautiful women, lots of music, lots of dancing, everything that, I guess, I don't know. I wouldn't know, but princes, I guess, or princesses maybe, uh, the life they have, right? Um, but one day he went outside the wall. I guess it was outside the walls. I don't know how he got outside the walls. Can't remember that part of the story. And he saw three things that really disturbed him, right? First, he passed, he was in his chariot and, all that. And and oh yeah, the king had made sure that that day when he was going out, that everybody was in their best finery and the flowers everywhere, everything was beautified, right? On the route to wherever he was going from point A to point B. But he saw three things, three visions he had. We don't know whether they're real people who appeared or they were just visions that he had. It's not clear. Either way, he saw this old person, right? Kind of with a long beard, white balding, white, wrinkled face and maybe with a walking stick, bent over on a walking stick. And he asked his charioteer, uh, his horse was called Kantaka. What was his charioteer? I can't remember his charioteer's name. He asked his charioteer, like, who is that guy, right? And the charioteer said, oh, he's just an old man. And he goes, what does an old man mean? And he goes, well, Prince Siddhartha, that's his name. Um, everybody becomes old, right? I mean, and also, by the way, the king had made sure that it was only the young, the beautiful young people who were, lining the streets. So everybody becomes old. And he was like, wow, really? I mean, he hadn't seen an old person until then, right? So that was a revelation to him, right? So he keeps going, he's thinking, and he keeps going. And then he has this vision or sees this person who is, probably begging on the side of the road and is quite ill and sick, maybe retching and, etc. I mean, well, even now in India, you can see retching people, I guess. Well, that's not so true anymore. When I lived in India, it was definitely true. Um, but back then, I'm sure, of course, if you were sick, I mean, there were no doctors or anything, right? So you just dealt with it. So there was, you saw a sick person and he asked the charioteer again, and the charioteer said, well, you got people have these things called sicknesses that come up and they can't do anything about it. They might, it might keep, debilitate them, or it might kill them, or, well, he doesn't know about killing yet, but he might debilitate them, or, they might recover and be okay again until the next time they're sick. And so that was interesting to the Siddhartha as well, the prince. So that keeps on going, and then he sees these four people with this, you know, the thing God, English is escaping me today, carrying a dead body, right, on the way to the funeral pyre. And he was like, wow, there's a white, this person, I guess he wasn't fully covered, just the head was there, but it was shrouded. Usually you have a white shroud on them. And so he asked about that and he goes, oh, that's a dead person. And he goes, death? What does that mean? And he said, and the charioteer said, well, everybody at some point, the life ends and their body just, turns to dust. Either you rot if you're not being burnt on the funeral pyre, or if you're burnt, then you turn into ashes. But, that's pretty much the end of it, right? And that really struck him, right? So basically, that's what he started really thinking. So this worldly life that we see and that we treasure, it's really not like that at all, right? It's really just pleasant gaps between, periods of, I guess I'll use the word suffering, right? Until at the end, it's over and done with, right? And so it's not really how it seems. It's not really what life is like at all, right? And it's all going to happen to me as well, right? None of us, as this charioteer told him, right? None of us is immune from any of those three things: old age, sickness, and death. And, shattered his view, really. And, he was really shocked by what he saw, especially because everything around him was so different, right? I mean, you can imagine if you're, like, if when you were a kid, for example, the first time you think about, you find out that, Santa Claus, well, if you're of the Christian tradition, Santa Claus doesn't exist, right? I mean, it's kind of like that, right? But even more so, right? Um, Although for most people, I think it's a dawn, it's not like a sudden revelation. You kind of figure it out, right? I mean, it's, so there's that. I mean, I didn't grow up in this country, so I didn't even know about Santa Claus, but so that's another story. Um, so we can take, we can think about, think about our life. Why do we tell this story still, right? And you can see how even in our life, in my life, when I'm, even though I've studied for a long time, to be honest with you, when I see my, I'm a beginner just as much as you are. It's, I know a lot of things, right? That's the difference. I'll be honest, right? The difference between, just because I have robes on doesn't mean that I'm some realized person. I'm not. Right? Most of us who have robes on are not. There are a few that I know who are truly realized. That's they are in a different plane. But most of us, robes on, we struggle just like you do. It's not any different. Right? We have the same similar anxieties, similar worries, similar problems, similar whatever it is, right? They take different shapes and size, shapes, different, they manifest in different contexts or different ways. Even those of us who live in monastery, I don't live in a monastery. I spend some time in a monastery every year, but I don't live full time in a monastery. Even those who live in a monastery and who are quote unquote sheltered, if you will. I mean, monastery life is hard. You're living like you're living with the same people constantly, day in, day out. You're doing everything with them. I mean, there are a lot of things that come up. Okay. It's like being married, truly honest, except that you're married to like 20, 30, 100 other people, you know. So so monastery nunnery life is, so anyway, so so I'm a beginner just like you are. It's said that I just know more. That's all. And anybody can know more. What matters is really whether it's in, I don't know if you can see Jane, but yeah, what's in here. That's really, we all of us have a lot up here, right? But it's not down here. I mean, that's where the mental transformation comes, is when it's down here. So I'm still working on it just like you are. So, anyway, so so the Buddha's life is relevant still because you see, we have the same misconceptions like he did, right? I mean, if you think about it, I mean, all of us who are here and and Jane as well, we don't have the material wants really. Our material wants are for the most part satisfied, right? I mean, we have food, we have clothing, we have shelter. Um, and we have, we have in this country, we have, we live a luxurious life for the most part, right? Um, and, we think our lives are not so bad. If you think, like many times I'll think, you know, it's not so bad, right? I mean, what, I mean, it's not so, I can, I don't know, I can distract myself by watching television or going to I love baseball. So going to a baseball game or, going to the movies or, getting a new car if I have money or getting a new husband or a wife if it works out, you know, And so new relationships, new whatever it is, right? Go out dancing, there's so many things that are available to us, right? Because we don't have the material wants anymore, right? But if you think about our lives, even when we're thinking that things are actually pretty good, it's really, is it really true? What am I trying to say? If you think, all of us are at an age where we have some wisdom now, right? We can kind of look back on our lives and we can see the the overall the arc of our life, right? And if we think about the arc and think about all the times that we were content, let's say, right? How long did it last? Right? And there's those, it's really in a way, it was these these periods, like even if you take your day, right? You eat lunch, let's say, you're here, you'll eat lunch at some point, and that'll be filling, that'll feel nice. And then, that'll be nice for a while, and then come around late afternoon, early evening, you'll start being hungry again. And then you're wanting, the next meal. And, then you want dessert because the meal wasn't enough. And then you want some, I don't know, it's always this whole thing about this up and down of, so if never enough, right? We get a promotion, we get more money, and somehow, like 6 months later, it's like, okay, I don't have enough money again, right? Or, you have a partner, you meet somebody really wonderful and everything is great. And then, you start living together, let's say, or get married, and then the little things start really annoying you. And, they're all their little foibles become, like all those things, right? That were never, we were, because we had these rose tinted glasses during the beginning phase, right? We were, we were willing to basically, we convinced ourselves that this person was wonderful. And maybe the person was wonderful. There's no, but every person comes with his or her, like little things, right? But we are willing to just put them as, so we don't see any of those things, right? So it's like that we go through life. And so in a way, the Buddha's life was like that, right? He just wasn't seeing what the world truly is like. And so, did that make sense, first of all? Does it make sense when I say that, these periods of happiness, if you will, whatever happiness means to each of us, or joy or contentment, right, are very ephemeral. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't look for joy or look for contentment, right? We'll get to that. But it's the same way that, when we get a new car or a new husband or a new wife or a new partner, we're willing to, just put on this lens. And the lens only shows the things we want to see, right? And keep away the things we don't want to see. And that's what our life is like. For the most part, I see what I want to see, but I want to push away. I don't want to think about sickness. I don't want to think about mental suffering, right? Because of whatever the next anxiety that comes or whatever it is, next situation that to raise anxiety or worries. I don't want to think about, death, right? But it's just a nature of our life, right? We may not think about it, but it's going to happen regardless, right? So what he said, there's got to be a better way, right? I mean, is this really all there is? Right? I mean, that was the question he asked himself. Um, and he thought, I'm looking at the clock to see where I am and where is a good place to stop. Okay. So he he looked around in his palace and he was like, this is not gonna help me. Right? I mean, I don't see anything here that's actually going to help me figure this out. And he had this inner drive, I guess, to really figure it out, right? Which is interesting. I mean, which is very unusual, right? I mean, to like keep pushing, and not be satisfied with his condition and try to figure it out because it was not going to be easy. I mean, he knew that, right? But he had to figure it out. His charioteer was what he had grown up with, was his best friend, and so he convinced him one night to like let him escape, right? So with his favorite horse, Kantaka, I remember the horse, but I don't forget the charioteer's name, and they left, right? And he took him to a forest, like far away from the palace. They rode overnight. And when he got to the forest, he gave his horse and his princely robes, etc., to his friend, right? And he said, "Take this back, and I won't see you from now on until I figure this out," right? And so, anyway, I'll make a long story short, but he went into the forest, and back then in India, and still now actually, there's all these ascetics who practice in far away, in cemeteries, charnel grounds, forests in India. You can go see them even now if you want. Um, so, and there were lots of these sages, if you will, who had their ashrams, right? I mean, but they were basically in the forests and they had disciples, etc. So he decided that he was going to study with them, try to figure this out, right? Um, and he went to one sage and went to another and spent 5 years basically practicing very, very ascetic practices, right? And asceticism, I don't know if they don't feed themselves for, months, and they stand on one leg and, whatever. The idea is to rid oneself of attachment by um, overcoming all the suffering of the body, right? Um, so, he did all these practices and he went, and he learned a lot of, and by the way, all these meditation techniques that we'll learn, all originated in the Hindu practices back then, right? So there's a lot of the meditations that one does in Buddhist practice is not unique to Buddhism, right? And you will find, so in Buddhism, you'll hear sometimes, if you stick around, you'll hear, what's called common and uncommon realizations, to gain common and uncommon realizations. So the common means what's common to other traditions, non-Buddhist traditions. So realizations of, great mental peace or great, happiness, or, you know, traveling to other places, like manifesting in other worlds and all these other things. They're not they're not unique to Buddhism, right? So the Hindus of the time were able to do that, and even now, I expect, do those kind of things, right? So those are the uncommon realizations is what is the Buddhist, so that's specific to Buddhism. But so anyway, back to Siddhartha, so he went to all these sages and he learned all these meditation practices, meditation techniques, and he also learned their understanding of how to find if you will, eternal happiness, right? Um, but none of them satisfied in the question, right? I mean, it didn't help him understand how things came to be and how one can overcome, right, all these ills, if you will. I mean, number one, can you overcome the ills, right? And number two, how do you do that, right? And all the, practitioners of the time, they spoke about, the universal consciousness. I mean, they still speak about, in Hindu traditions. I grew up in the Hindu tradition. The universal consciousness, we kept becoming one with the universal consciousness, et cetera. Well, what is the universal, these are the questions he asked himself, right? I can't see it, right? I don't, how, just like he asked his disciples to question everything he says, he was questioning all the things he was being told, right? And it just didn't make sense. He didn't see. And also then he got to all these, there's various levels. And again, I'm not going to go into this in this cycle, if you will, but if you take other courses, you'll learn about them. But there's different levels of meditational planes, right? Different meditational planes, right? And they're well documented. I mean, and you can go from one plane to the next in your meditation, um, and he got to, so, in meditation, you can get to some of these, where you can basically be, just in meditation for months, years at a time, right, with no food and and etc. But that still didn't, once you got out of it, you were still back to where you were, right? The problem was in meditation, everything is great, right? But once you're out of meditation, you're back to the real world. And maybe you're slightly better than you went, when you started, your meditation. But, you know, not much has changed, right? And anyway, I can tell you stories that are from the Hindu tradition that I remember. Okay, I'll tell you and give you an example. Like when you grow up in India, you're taught these two great epics. I don't know, one of them is the longest one in the world or whatever in history, the Mahabharata, and the other one is the Ramayana. But anyway, these long epics, and in them they talk about these sages in the forests and whatever, right? And these sages are really, really, really realized beings, and they can put curses on people, and they can prophesy, and they can all the stuff, right? So anyway, so there are many, many stories of like this, like one sage I'm thinking of, for example, he was in the forest, and he was revered by everyone, and he was in meditation for years. And this, yeah, I think he was a prince. So anyway, so his prince was, shooting deer or whatever. He was, in the forest, and he came across this guy, and I don't know, he disturbed him. I don't remember exactly how he disturbed the sage during his meditation, right? And he came out of his meditation, and he was absolutely furious. He was like, and he cursed the prince on the spot, right? And I remember listening to this when I was a child, and I'm like, so you're in this amazing meditational plane, but you're just somebody who disturbs you, and you're immediately just lost all of it, all of your peace of mind, right? And so this is not just in the Buddha, this is in the Hindu traditions as well. You can read these stories, right? So this is what the Buddha saw. And he's like, this doesn't make sense, right? I mean, if you're really overcoming suffering and overcoming attachment, after meditation, you should be better off than you were when you went in, right? So anyway, so he found out so he decided this is not the way. Um, And he left. He left all those, the ashrams, and he decided that, okay, I'm just going to have to figure this out for myself. And he went in, he just went into, and he said, I've tried the princely life, right? All the luxuries, all the food, all the, the women, all the, distractions, etc. And I've tried the ascetic life that hasn't, neither of them has worked, right? So there must be something in between, right? The middle way that he said, right? And I got to figure out what that is, right? Um, and then, so so that's a good place to stop because you'll want to know what happens next, right? So, anyway, so let's stop for, is 5 minutes enough or is it 10? Okay, let's stop for 7 minutes. We'll do the whatever, split it. So we'll be back at 11 Mountain Time. So on the hour, Jane. Yeah, okay. Thank you. See you in a bit. Yeah, so maybe what we'll do is we'll start with just a minute of just reflecting. So we kind of saw some of the Buddha's life, right? Or heard some of the Buddha's life and his search. And so maybe we can think about our life and see where we come from, right? Where our life had, significant moments, right? And what it meant for us and how it shaped you're here, so clearly you're searching for something, that's, so how it shaped your search, I guess, whatever you're looking for now, right? What is it that brought you there and how it might be related to the kind of things that the Buddha was looking at or experiencing. So maybe just a minute. Okay. Um, so yeah, so the Buddha was searching, and he realized that what was available to him at that time was not adequate for him, right? That didn't answer his questions, the basic questions about the world, right? That he had, not about where the world came from and how the universe was formed, etc. That wasn't the Buddha's interest, right? In fact, there's a story of someone who came to the Buddha and wanted to test him. I guess to prove he was a skeptic and he didn't, he didn't like the Buddha so much, So, but he asked him these difficult questions, and one of the questions was, like, where does the world come from, right? Or the universe, how, because the Hindus said, about Brahma, anyway, these gods who shaped it and blah, blah, blah. And the Buddha said, it's not relevant. That's not relevant to our lives, right? I only speak about things that actually are relevant to finding our true self, our true nature, finding peace and joy, etc. How the world was formed is not of interest to me. So he actually didn't answer the question, right? And so that was his, like his search was about the inner search, right? The external world questions about the external world weren't as important, right? And that's what Buddhism, for the most part, it focuses on, right? It focuses on the inner world. And as one of my teachers said, he said that people spend so much time on, going to outer space and bottom of the ocean and, the particle physics and et cetera. I'm also very interested in physics. So I study physics as well when I have time. So that's the other thing, But my teacher said, but he said, if you focus on the inner world, you find there's so much interesting things that we just don't even know, right? It's just really, and it's more interesting than looking and seeing what's outside, But anyway, that's an aside. So the Buddha, he was focusing on the inner world, and it wasn't satisfying to him what the answers he found at the time. So he went off and he said, okay, I'm just going to, he went to this what's famous Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, which burnt in the late 800s, I think. I can't remember what sometime, but it's a banyan, it's a banyan tree, yeah. But it puts down, what do you call it, the long, whatever those, so it's child, I guess, so the current tree is actually genetically equivalent to the first one, but it's not exactly the first one. But the current tree has been around for 1,000 years or something like that. Anyway, so he said, okay, I'm going to go under this, but yeah, he will go under this tree, and I'm going to meditate and try to figure this out, and I'm not going to rise from my seat until I'm done. And I don't remember how many weeks or months he spent under that tree, but in any case, he went, so basically he went through, I was talking about this meditational planes. He went through all those meditational planes, and he really inspected and really, there's something called, there's a state of mind called calm abiding, where the mind is so sharp and it can stay focused on any one thing for effortlessly and for any length of time. Will never get distracted, right? And it's actually one of the stages on the path, Jane, that we learn on how to develop calm abiding. It's actually not that hard if one is focused and has the right conditions. But in any case, so it's very, very sharp. So he focused his mind on the nature of the world, and he discovered, and that's when he discovered, the how things exist, how things are, how things arise, how things cease, and why, we are caught in this cycle. We'll talk more about the cycle later. And and then but it was, but as we find in our own practice, and as my teachers, a couple of my teachers, some of whom have passed away, they said that, when you're getting close to defeating the self, this, the self, the grasping to one's self, right? Which we'll find is the reason for all our problems, if you will, right? When one is getting close to realizing how its nature, and how it doesn't exist the way it appears, there's a great resistance that arises. To some people, it's a great fear that arises. but to some people, it's a resistance that arises. To others, it's to the Buddha, for example, that also arose. And the way the story is said is that the king of the demons, right? But I think this is figure, that's king of the demons sent all these waves of, shooting arrows, beautiful women, others, I don't remember all the details, but, at him and to distract him, because the self doesn't want to give up, right? The resistance arises because the self is so strong in us that when we are about to penetrate its nature, it's very smart. It will throw away, throw distractions, and it will send you down wrong blind alleys. I mean, no, it's really, if you're in meditation like that, that's how it appears. And send you down blind alleys and distract you. And then finally, when nothing has worked, it will bring up fear or attachment, like, the arrows of women and so on, right? So that's what this talks about. And so and finally, none of this worked. And so Mara is the king of the demons. Mara said, why do you think that you are qualified, or you have, why do you think that you can, find what you're looking for, or find the answer, right? Because no one else has. What makes you think that you're so special, right? And so the story goes, the Buddha, so the Buddha then he was sitting in meditation posture. He touched the ground with his right hand over his knee, right? And he said that the earth is my witness that I have been on this path for many lifetimes, right? This is not the first time, right? And that I have been here many, many lifetimes looking for this answer. And finally, I've been able to find it, right? And that's why you see always in the Buddha statue where his right hand is on his knee and touching the base of the ground, right? So all Buddha statues, Shakyamuni Buddha, the Shakyamuni Shakyamuni means the sage of the Shakyas. His princely tribe was called the Shakyas, right? So Shakya is the sage of the Shakyas, Shakyamuni Buddha. So that Buddha, the historic Buddha in our time, so that's why he's always touching, his right hand is touching the ground. That's how you know that's a Shakyamuni Buddha. His representation always has that, Other Buddhas have other representations, but he always has that representation. So anyway, so at that moment, finally, he was called the awakened one, right? That's what Buddha means. Bold is means the mind, the awakened mind, right? To wake up from sleep, or to wake up from like kind of like I was blind, but now I see, from that amazing grace, right? We are all blind. And I mean, that's once we see our true nature, right? That's when we can see. In fact, when what it's called the path of seeing, when one gets to the place where one has direct perception of how our nature really is, you have entered the path of seeing, right? Because we are blind before then. So that's why he's called the awakened one, the Buddha means the awakened one. Any questions? So that's the end of, and then and then he taught so I'll just finish the rest of his life really quickly. And then he taught for 50 years, a long time. So this was around the he was 30, I think. He went off when he was around in his 25, maybe something like that. Which interestingly, Jesus was around 30 when he started preaching, and then he was 32, I think. He only preached for 2 years. So it's around that, like that age time. So, but the Buddha didn't get crucified, so he actually lived to be 80 years old, and so he taught for 50 years. And his wife became one of his disciples. His son Rahula um, became one of his treasured disciples also. Um, and he basically traveled all over North India and going back, that's what you did back then. You were itinerant, right? I mean, you just traveled from village to village and city to city, and people would then ask you, I'm having this problem, what do I do? My son is doing this, our son has run off with this girl, blah blah blah, all these, all the same problems we have today, right? Not much has changed, to be honest, in 2,500 years, really, right? I mean, we just have bigger houses and flushable toilets and so on, right? But other than that, it really hasn't changed all that much. So there's, same problems, I'm sick, what do I do? You know, I don't have money to take care of my father, what do I do? Blah, 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 all these. And there are many, many stories. That's what the sutras are about. I mean, you can read all these stories, it'll say so-and-so, the Buddha was at so-and-so village and so-and-so, somebody called so-and-so came to him, asked him this question. Here's what the Buddha said, right? His advice, right? And that's essentially what became the set of the teachings that we now have, right? I mean, similar to like the Bible stories of Jesus, if you think about it, right? I mean, he just traveled and people came and, the Roman soldier who came to him, and about his son and so on and so forth, like that, right? So advice, and then also advice to his disciples, right? He also started ordaining, monastics who came to him, and then because of, and in the beginning there weren't, I mean, they were just trying this out, right? It was basically starting, they were just all brand new to them, right? So as things would happen, like somebody would see a monk in the village and he was not doing something that was truly kosher. So then Buddha would get a report back saying so-and-so was doing such and such and this, over there, and people, it was engendering disrespect for the monastics, So then the Buddha said, okay, from now on, you can't do this, right? So those of us who are fully ordained monks, we have, monks have 253, 250, depending, 50 odd vows, most of those vows are like that. In the modern world, it's relatively easy to keep because those don't arise that much. Nuns have even more. They have 300 some, depending on again which tradition. So similar. So anyway, so all these rules came into being, and then he set the monastic tradition and monasteries, etc. So and then he passed away when he was 80. I forget now where he passed away. Where did he pass away? Can't remember. Okay, anyway, he passed away, and the disciples were distraught, because what were they going to do? And so Ananda, one of his chief disciple, he was crying, and Buddha said, he said, there's no reason to cry because everything, I have already told you everything, right? It's not me who you should revere, right? It's the path that I showed you. If you follow what I told you, then you'll become just like me. You don't need me, right? And that's basically what we're all taught, right? In fact, when you learn about guru devotion, etc., in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, one of the jobs of the teacher is just, teachers are like parents, right? Their job is to make sure they bring up the child in such a way that the child can be independent, right? The child, as an adult, it's a contributing member of society, and is a compassionate, kind, whatever, right? I mean, that's the parent's job, right? And that's what the teacher's job is also. The teacher basically guides you until you have your own wisdom, right? I mean, wisdom with a, global, in the global sense, not the Buddhist wisdom, what specifically wisdom means, but in, wisdom that we call somebody has wisdom. And that's, once you have the wisdom, you don't need the teacher anymore. You revere the teacher. There's stories of Lama Tsongkhapa in our tradition. So Lama Tsongkhapa, who is the founder of our tradition, where is Lama Tsongkhapa's? Well, there's not a big picture here, but there's a statue here with his two disciples, so you can't really see very well. Oh, that's Lama Tsongkhapa up there on the right, the tanka. Anyway, so this was in the 14th century, and he went all over Tibet to get teachings because he wasn't satisfied like the Buddha, like what he was hearing. And so he then synthesized, all the teachings, and he attained enlightenment, certainly. But his main teacher, Rendala, and he were kind of about halfway through Lama Tsongkhapa's life. Lama Tsongkhapa lived to be in his late 60s, I think. I can't remember, but around for 30 years, his teacher and he were like, what do you call it? Peers, right? His teacher would ask him questions, and Lama Tsongkhapa would, they would have this dialogue. You can see the letters, right? Because Lama Tsongkhapa was, they were at the same level. They didn't need each other, right? So they were so the teacher's job is to basically, so that's what the Buddha was trying to impart to Ananda, and that's what we have to understand, is that the wisdom that the Buddhism and the Buddha talks about is not something the teacher, in the beginning, of course, the teacher guides us, gives us the instructions, personal instructions that we need sometimes, or gives us the teachings, understand, what works and what doesn't work, the pitfall, all these things, right? But at some point, if we have practiced well enough, we have our own inner wisdom, right? And that guides us. And yeah, we don't need, like my main teacher, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, who is, the bottom over there. He passed away a couple of years ago, right? I was very sad when he left this world, but, I know what I need to do, right? I know what my issues are. I know what I need to work on. I know where I'm going. He gave me instruction before last set of instructions before he passed away. And I know what I need to do in this life, right? I don't need him to be around to keep guiding me, right? I'm not saying I'm some great realized being. I'm not. But I'm just saying that, that's what a teacher-student relationship is like. And that's what the Buddha was trying to impart to him. You question what the teacher is saying. You examine when I say his, I mean her as well. You question what he or she is saying, and you try to figure out whether it's correct for you, right? And when it is clear, we adopt that perspective, right? And we, practice it, stay on it, meditate on it, whatever it is. And at some point, it changes the way we are. We integrate it into ourselves. And the teacher's wisdom becomes our own wisdom, right? And that's how one grows, at least in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So anyway, that was an aside. Um, I blasted through his last bits of his life. I don't, but do you have any questions on the Buddha's life before we? I mean, I think that's pretty much as I'll probably say about the Buddha. Um, Jane or Sandy, yeah, Sandy man. No question?
do we know what the Buddha's stance was about religion? And whether he was consciously establishing a religion, or was it,
Oh,
or was it more, developing ways of seeing?
right. So the question is, when the Buddha was teaching, did he see it as he was starting a new tradition, new religion, if you will? Yeah. Yes and no. So know that. Okay, so I had just briefly, in passing, I had mentioned that this was a time of upheaval in India because things were changing, right? The merchant class was becoming more and more powerful. The priests were being questioned, their usefulness and so on. People were trying to question, the caste system, etc. Um, being a merchant and trader, all that stuff brings upward mobility, right? So finally people are starting to think, well, do I need to stay in the same caste, or do I need to do the same thing that my father and his father did, for umpteen generations? And so, to answer your question, the Buddha was, so for example, he was a radical of his time. He was radical in the sense that he said that anybody can join. You don't have to be any particular caste, right? There is no caste, doesn't matter. Everyone has the same discerning mind and the same potential, right, of Buddhahood. So that was one, right? That was one radical thing to say at the time. Second radical thing was, even though he was a little reluctant in the beginning, but he was, he. Uh, so second radical thing was that he admitted women into into his disciples, right? And there are many stories about his women disciples. So that was very rare, right? Third thing was that he said, you don't, the whole idea of gods and stuff, of creator gods, is just, I don't want to say BS, but rather is not the true nature, is not real, right? Which was also unusual. Although there was another religion that was started at the time, it was started by the guy called Mahavira. He also said that, but the Buddha said so that's his third radical thing. And the fourth radical thing is that, many others, I'm sure, but the last one I can think of is that everyone can become enlightened. I mean, there's such a thing called enlightenment. We already have all the potential in us already. It's not like we have to reach for something else. It's just that it's occluded, clouded, right? It's like the blue sky, right? Well, not in New Mexico, but a lot of other places, you have the sky is clouded, right? Cloudy. You can't see the sky, but that doesn't mean it's not there, right? And the clouds over time part, right? So our minds are like that too. We have the Buddha potential. It just so happens for various reasons, and we'll discuss all those later. That potential is hidden, if you will, or we can't see it, right? That's again the path of seeing, blind, but now I can see, right? So that's another, when our true potential becomes clear, is another way to look at it, right? So that was, so he was saying some very, very unorthodox things. And he had lots of people who followed him. Yet he was not thinking that I'm going to start something new, right? I mean, I don't think same way that Jesus wasn't thinking that I'm going to start something called Christian tradition, right? Such a thing did not exist till what, 300 years after his death, really, right? They were just Jews who followed Christ until then, right? So it's the same thing with the Buddha, maybe 200 years after his death. But same thing with the Buddha. He wasn't thinking that he was starting something. He was just saying that even within the existing Hindu structure, uh, there is another way, right? And that's how it pretty much was for another couple of hundred years until the monasteries really became, until then, there were small groups of monks and nuns, but they hadn't grouped themselves together. So it took a couple of hundred years. At what point the monasteries became established, the kings, they started, being royal patrons, etc., right? And that's when you could say that, something called Buddhism appeared, right? With a rigorous, the Pali Canon appeared and all that stuff started happening, right? So not at the time of the Buddha, but later. Yeah, probably around Alexander's time. So the Buddha was 500 some BC. Alexander was 326 is when he invaded India. So yeah, around that time, like that. Okay. Yeah. So maybe what we'll do now is we will kind of just learn about meditation, right? This is a kind of a good place to kind of segue. Um, and we'll talk more about what meditation is in a bit. But how many of you at least have, like, even in a yoga studio, doesn't matter, right? Like, quote unquote, meditated. Like, okay, great. Jane, yes. Okay. So you've been told about how, well, I don't know if you've been told, but so there are ways of doing meditation and, you know, and they talk about the posture of the body. And the reason they talk about a specific posture of the body is that it's what brings the right conditions, if you will, inner conditions for the mind to be calm. Okay. There's also a comfort aspect to it. And we'll talk about that. If the traditional instruction says you have to sit cross-legged, but, if you can't, it's okay, right? So we'll talk about that. But in any case, comfort is actually very important, right? Comfort is actually maybe the most important, because if your body is not comfortable, your meditation is not going to go well. You're going to keep, like, the knee pain and this pain and that pain and something falling asleep. It's going to be distracting, right? So that's not going to be particularly helpful. So comfort is very important. So all throughout this, I will mention things and I will talk about how to make it comfortable, right? So there's something called the 7-point posture. There's 7 aspects to this posture they talk about. So the first one is the legs. And Jane can't see, but you can imagine, I guess. So, the appropriate way to do it is sit in the lotus position, which is cross-legged, which I can't do anymore. So, but basically so you sit, or you can sit with your right leg over left, right? Like that, when you're cross-legged. Or you can sit. If that's difficult, you can sit. Sometimes you'll see teachers, who are elderly or whatever. They'll sit with their right leg, they'll have a little platform here and they'll sit with their right leg out, or they'll sit with their right leg down, like in a chair, right? Whatever works. Basically, the bottom line is that one of the things about Tibetan Buddhism, which is great, and it might be true for other forms of Buddhism too, I just don't know, is that, all this stuff is just loose guidance, if you will. You can change it in any way you like. And that's one of the things that come, again, again, with wisdom, inner wisdom comes this understanding, right? What one can change and which things are important, which things aren't. But from a meditative posture standpoint, you can change all of these things. Okay. So if you can sit cross-legged, sit in a chair, right? Or walk if that's hard, right? It's okay. Whatever helps one in the meditation, right? To have to whatever one is trying to achieve in meditation, let's say if you're doing mindfulness meditation where you just, focus on one thing, you can, when we'll talk about objects of meditation, etc., you can walk, you can sit in a chair, you can sit cross-legged, whatever you want to do, right? So that's one, legs. Second a bit is the hands, which however you're sitting, they say that it's good if you can, and it's easy to do this, is to sit with your right hand over left and thumbs touching. So, and this in your lap, right? So kind of like, like this, Jane, if you're, like this, right? In your lap. But again, if your thumbs don't reach, it's okay, right? If your thumbs collapse, mine, they say, like ideally, you want to be like this, right? Like a teardrop shape, but my thumbs just collapse, like that. It's okay, right? So, and the reason for that is that, so all of these things we'll talk about is that there are as you get more familiar with what the mind is and what supports the mind and so on, there's, if you have studied yoga or other things, and this is true in Indian Buddhism as well as Tibetan Buddhism, is there are, chakras and channels of what's called winds, but really energy, right? That flows up and, flows throughout the body. And having a hand together like this, and sitting cross-legged or sitting with their feet down, feet on the ground, it helps the winds, the energy, go up and down the body smoothly, right? And the smoother unobstructed, if you will, the smoother unobstructed the energy, the winds can travel, the calmer the mind is, etc. Okay. In fact, at the time of death is when there's absolutely no obstruction whatsoever, and actually the winds, that's a whole another story. But that's we are trained at the time of death that if one is able to, as one trains during life about what the death process is, what happens during death, right? So it's familiar, right? You train in it. So at the time of death, what's happening, and you can actually meditate at that time if you train during your life, and I reach very, very high, if not enlightenment. That's what Lama Tsongkhapa did. You can reach enlightenment, at the time of death, right? Because the winds are totally unobstructed, and the mind, because the winds are the support for the mind is absolutely clear, right? Anyway, that's another whole topic. So anyway, so hands at the hands like this at our lap. The spine, whether you're sitting in a chair or whether sitting on a cushion, the spine is meant to be straight, but with the natural curvature, right? We have a natural curvature, towards the lower back, right? So you just kind of have the natural curvature, because again, it's comfort, right? Because if you're spending long hours and you're hunched over, or, like really like this, or, like your chest out, like, you're really trying hard to have a straight spine, it's going to be distracting, right? So you just want to have a natural, whatever works, right? But they suggest not to have lean back like on a couch or lean back in a chair. And the reason for that is, again, slouching, for example, will make you sleep. It makes you fall asleep more, right? Also, the winds, I don't remember all the details, to be honest, but the winds don't travel as well, those kinds of things, right? So back straight and, spine straight, but, relaxed, right? That's the most important thing. All of this is relaxing, right? Hands are relaxed, legs are relaxed, arms are relaxed, spines are relaxed, like that. Next is sometimes they, like, it's easy to actually, if you think about how, sometimes they say, imagine that, the crown of your head is reaching for the sky, right? That's one way to kind of have us, like help the spine be, if you just, rather than making your muscle, like make your muscles do the work, right? Which brings more tension. If you think about, the crown of your head reaching for the sky, it'll automatically be, comfortable and straight, so like that. Eyes, we are told, the instructions are to have the eyes, lids, first of all, the lids are closed like 3/4 of the way, but you can still see, like, just, like in front of me, I can see just the basic, the floor, whatever. But the gaze, I'm not looking at the floor, like the lines on the floor and the carpet and so on. The gaze is kind of just, like, it's a relaxed gaze, you know what I mean? Somewhere like in the middle, like a few feet away and just like that, right? So you're not focusing on anything, your eyes are just resting and your eyelids are, half or 3/4 closed. Now, some people can't do that, right? It's okay then if you want to keep your eyes totally closed, right? Whatever's comfortable again, whatever's easy. The reason they say 3/4 closed is twofold, maybe more fold, but twofold, at least that I can remember. One is that it's kind of helps you not fall asleep, right? Eyes closed. I certainly fall asleep, right? In fact, eyes 3/4 closed, I fall asleep too. So I actually a lot of time will meditate just with my eyes wide open, which you can too if it works, right? The other reason 3/4 closed, it says, is what you don't want to do, or what the suggestion is, or the rationale is that you don't want to block yourself away from the world, right? That the idea is that we are in our mental space, but we're still in the world, right? We are not removing ourselves from the world and just going someplace else, right? So there's that aspect of it, right? Also, if wild animals are coming and attacking you, you'll know before they come, I guess. But, if you're in the forest, but anyway. So yeah, so the eyes slightly open. Mouth and tongue, just, relaxed jaw, and the lips touching, I guess. So yeah, relaxed jaw. That's important because we tend to clench our jaws, right? Which also the more tension, this is just like in yoga, right? I mean, it's you want to have as little tension as possible, right? Less tension you have. When I say you, I mean one. These are all reminders to myself as well. The less tension one has, the easier it is for the mind to relax and be able to concentrate. Tension in the body creates tension in the mind. So jaws, relaxed, lips touching. And then finally it says, or no, not finally, but tongue touching the palate. the roof of the mouth, right? Just like slightly behind the teeth. Now, why is that? For most of us, that's not an issue. But the reason is that if you are doing long periods of meditation, hours, days, weeks, well, not hours, days, but I mean, if you're like, let's say, a couple of hours in meditation, you're going to start to drool. And so tongue touching the palate actually stops you from drooling. It's true, actually, it does work. I've tried it. So, but, for most of us, that's not, we're not spending hours in meditation. So that's not such an issue. So, yeah. And then finally, I forgot to mention, the elbows are just, like the wings of a bird. They're just kind of at the side, with a little gap if possible. It depends on your body shape and all that. But just relaxed again, right? A relaxed elbow, not pressing out, or pressing in. Just relaxed shoulders, relaxed elbows. So again, all of this can be tailored to whatever works for you, right? Yeah. Does that make sense? Any questions?
I think that's 7.
Did you count 6? Okay, so let's see. Legs, hands, back. Oh, yes, thank you. Last one. Yeah, so we did legs, hands, back, mouth and tongue, elbows, and so that's 6. Yes, 7. Thank you. Neck. So again, it's just to keep everything relaxed. Your neck is just, it's kind of like relaxed neck and shoulders, and they say to just have your chin like slightly tucked. Not like, just again, it's about relaxation, right? So like slightly tucked, so not like looking straight out, because that forces your neck to have to, work, right? But if it's slightly tucked, it's just naturally there's no work involved. So that's the last thing. Thank you. Yeah. And as I said, all of those things are, if neck slightly tucked is hard for you, but straight ahead is easy, do that, right? Well, you don't want to have a clenched jaw. So relaxed jaw, yeah, that's for everyone. But tongue on your palate, you don't need to do it, right? Again, arms at the elbow, all that stuff, right? But the most important is probably the back. The back is the most important. And yeah, so any other questions?
This distinction between sitting Zen and doing this style of practice, because my impression of Zen is that discomfort is almost part of the path.
Okay, so question was, is this style of practice different from Zen, where it's, this is David saying this, not me. David saying that, it seems that discomfort is almost a part of the path in Zen, right? First thing, I don't know, I know very little about Zen, okay? So I really can't say, about Zen specifically. What I can say is late Indian, and then what became Tibetan Buddhism, is that no, discomfort, what you don't want is discomfort. Everything that you do, you want to be as easy and relaxed and comfortable as possible. And that's why the guidance that teachers give, like for example, you might have seen people do prostrations, right? Well, what if you can't do, because the body can't do prostrations? Well, they say, well, you can do it mentally. I mean, you can't just space out and just think I'm doing a prostration. You actually have to visualize that you're doing the full arm, but you can do it in your mind, right? What if you can't, you're traveling and you don't have, you have certain commitments to keep, and, you don't have the altar or whatever. Well, Imagine, visualize the altar, right? So it's all about ease and making it because the easier we make it for ourselves, the more likely we are to continue with the practice, right? At least that's the philosophy in the other Tibetan traditions as well. That's the philosophy in general. If you like doing it, you're going to do it again, right? If it becomes a chore, you're not going to do it again. Or if it becomes just, what's the word? If it's like, what, you just power through. That's what I meant. That's what I was trying to find. If you're just going to try to power through it, it'll work in the short term, but you're going to exhaust yourself, right? So that's what all this is about, is to make things as easy as possible. Yeah, I mean, same with vows, and like if sometimes, like if you take precepts, like I know that sometimes, like if you're traveling and you've taken precepts, you're supposed to eat at a particular time. Well, you're on a plane and time zone differences, whatever. It's okay. Just be conscious, but that and so you can do certain prayers and the vow is not broken, So there's many things like that, there's always ways of tailoring it to each of us, Again, it's part of inner wisdom to know what works and what doesn't work, whether the intention is correct. Like even when you're breaking a vow, that you're breaking it, but you do certain things to kind of ameliorate the impact effect. And so there's things you can do and what they are. And so, yeah. Okay. So maybe what we'll do is, if you don't mind, hopefully you don't, we will just practice, our meditation technique. Oh, how many of you, this is new to you? How many of you, this meditation posture and these points are new to you? None of you? Somewhat? Okay. Jane? No? Okay, great. So then let's just, what we'll do is a very traditional, basic, but when I say basic, I mean it's a foundational is a better word, not basic. Because if it's foundational or basic doesn't mean that those of us who have been around for a long time have actually conquered this. Foundational meditation practice, which is, oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention is sometimes you can put the hands on your lap, right hand over left, thumbs touching like that, or you can also put it on your knees, right? Just palms down on your knees is fine too. So I'll alternate sometimes because it gets tiring to be in one position, right? Yes.
When I said I could be gonna do that, is that, I mean, you kind of said it's whatever.
Whatever's, that's what they suggest.
Yeah.
You can try it. And the reason they suggest it is because the question was whether this, like, not Anthony, Anthony, yes. He naturally tends to do this. Is that okay? Probably. But you can try because it's suggested and the winds work better, travel better, to do this, right hand over left. Try it. If it's uncomfortable, if it's not natural, then you can go back to, the whatever you normally do. It's okay. So we'll do a foundational practice. So we'll just sit and just remember legs. How are our legs? Back. Our hands. Neck. Chin slightly tucked in. Eyes. Not focusing on anything. That's the most important. And tongue and jaw, should you wish to. Put your tongue on your palate, you can. Otherwise, just leave it where it is. So what we'll do is, so this is the mindfulness of the breath using the counting technique. So, we'll breathe out and breathe in, and we'll breathe in and breathe out. And every time we breathe out, that's one cycle, right? So we count one. And you just focus on the breath moving through your nostril down to your tummy. And then back out again. And every time you breathe out, you count. And just do this, and the goal, ideally, you want to get to 21 without your mind wandering. But that's actually difficult, you'll find. At some point, you'll find that the mind has gone someplace else. You've lost account or whatever. And when that happens, you just gently bring your mind back to the breath. Traditionally, you start from one again. But here you can keep counting, or you can start at again one, whatever you wish. Getting to 21 is not what we're trying to do here. But more importantly, just being able to rest the mind on the physical aspect of the breath moving in and out. So we'll do that for a couple of minutes. If your mind does wander, remember to be gentle with it. It wanders because it is the function of the mind to have thoughts, to look for things. So in the beginning stages, it's actually unnatural for the mind to rest on any single object. And even if you hear sounds and so on, you just let it be in the background, and you just focus on the in and out breath. Okay, So we'll stop there for now. And when we come back, we will, then we'll get into the actual meat of the Buddha's, the path what he discovered and the path to follow, right? Yeah. And but before we leave for lunch, just whatever, so in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, whenever you start a practice, meditation practice, or if you go to a teaching, they always start with it's always bookmarked by motivation. In the beginning, you think about why you're doing what you're doing and what state your mind is in. Is it in correct intention? Whatever it is, and what your goal is, right? Why you're doing it. And at the end, and so we did that in the beginning, right? And then at the end, you dedicate it. And the dedication is to kind of bring back to to around the circle, whatever it's called, right? To go back to the circle, to go back to your motivation and think about that. And as well, to dedicate it by, with a positive mental attitude, right? So, whatever. So, for example, a dedication I'll do often is, whatever I did, may it benefit me, right? But not just because of my own benefit, only of my own benefit. My benefit is important to grow, but not just my benefit, but so that I can also benefit others, right? So that's one way to dedicate. Or you can dedicate with, may it bring joy. May I continue, to continue to grow in the spiritually. May others find happiness. Whatever it is, whatever means something to us, we dedicate it with that. And we'll talk more about dedication and why to dedicate and standard ways to dedicate later on. But for now, that's, so we can, so think about that for just 10 seconds. Okay. Thank you very much. I will see you in hour and 25 minutes. And yeah. And during lunch, if you're able, just think about, how you're eating, what you're eating. Again, it's that mindfulness, right? Doesn't mean that you have to be quiet, and just, just every once in a while, just see, okay, where is my mind, right? Like that. So, okay.